The Zalrek Dominion had seen it all before. Hundreds of planets, thousands of species, all had fallen beneath the might of their relentless expansion. Some resisted for a time, clinging to false hope with primitive weapons and outdated strategies. Others surrendered at the mere sight of their towering warships, choosing servitude over annihilation. It made no difference. No world had ever truly withstood the Dominion's power. Earth would be no different. From the moment their long-range probes scanned the planet, the Zalrek warlords dismissed humanity as yet another inferior species. Their civilization, while surprisingly resourceful, was fragmented, divided into nations, ideologies, and cultures that constantly clashed with one another. Their space technology was laughable, their weapons crude compared to the hyper-advanced arsenal of the Dominion. They hadn't even mastered interstellar travel. The warlords saw no challenge, only another conquest to add to their growing empire. When the invasion began, it was swift and merciless. The first wave descended upon Earth without warning, streaks of burning light splitting the heavens as colossal warships punctured the atmosphere. Above the major cities, vast carriers unfurled, like mechanical leviathans, blotting out the sun as they deployed their cybernetic legions. Zalrek assault craft rained down like falling stars, striking military installations before Earth's defenders could even comprehend what was happening. The sheer scale of the attack paralyzed entire nations. Fighter jets scrambled to engage, but their primitive munitions barely scratched the alien hulls before being swatted from the sky. Missiles were intercepted mid-flight, their detonation nothing more than harmless sparks against impenetrable energy shields. Even nuclear arsenals, humanity's most fearsome weapons, were rendered useless. The Zalrek's planetary suppression beams neutralized them with surgical precision before they could ever launch. The warlords watched from orbit, their confidence unshaken. Earth's defeat was inevitable. The invasion was already progressing faster than predicted. Resistance would crumble, as it always did. Yet, something about this world felt strange. It began with small irregularities. The Zalrek had protocols, perfected over centuries of conquest, that predicted the response patterns of newly invaded species with near-flawless accuracy. Yet here, on Earth, things were not unfolding as expected. Human forces adapted at an alarming rate. They weren't just resisting, they were learning. The first unsettling reports came from the battlefield. Zalrek shock troopers, elite cybernetic warriors built for planetary domination, encountered unexpected difficulties. Their overwhelming firepower should have crushed human soldiers instantly, but somehow, resistance units began predicting their movements with eerie accuracy. Ambushes became more frequent, enemy counterattacks more coordinated. And then came the disappearances. Entire squads vanished without explanation. A patrol of 12 cybernetic troopers would enter an urban zone, fully armed, their sensors sweeping for hidden threats. And then, nothing. No distress signals, no signs of struggle. Just silence. When recon teams were sent to investigate, they found only discarded weapons and armor, as if the soldiers had simply ceased to exist. At first, the Dominion assumed it was mere guerrilla tactics. Perhaps humans had developed stealth-based warfare, techniques that had gone undetected by initial scans. The warlords ordered enhanced surveillance, deploying more drones, more sensors, more cybernetic enforcers to track every movement. But that only made things worse. Drones would go offline without cause, their transmissions cutting to static as if they had been swallowed by an invisible force. Entire battalions reported moments of inexplicable disorientation, where time itself seemed to skip forward, leaving them uncertain of what had just happened. High-ranking commanders, beings who had waged wars across the cosmos, felt something they had not experienced in centuries: unease. The warlords dismissed the concerns at first. Superstition had no place in the Dominion's conquests. Earth was nothing more than a minor world on the fringes of the galaxy, its people insignificant compared to the Dominion's might. And yet, as the days dragged on, the war that should have been won in mere cycles began to unravel. Cities that had fallen were retaken overnight. Human forces, despite their primitive technology, managed to hijack Dominion communication channels, using the enemy's own network to coordinate devastating counterstrikes. Strategic hubs were attacked before the Zalrek could reinforce them, as if the humans knew exactly where to strike and when. And then, the whispering began. Across every battlefield, Zalrek warriors reported the same sensation. The feeling of being watched, even when no enemy was in sight. Their cybernetic enhancements, immune to fear, registered anomalies that could not be explained. Shadows moved where there were no light sources. Energy readings flickered unpredictably. Some even claimed to hear distorted echoes of their own voices, spoken back to them in languages they did not understand. The warlords, still unwilling to admit something was wrong, ordered a full-scale planetary lockdown. More forces were deployed, cities were reduced to rubble, and yet, for every human they killed, another seemed to rise with knowledge they should not have possessed. The Dominion, for the first time in its existence, was fighting an enemy that defied its understanding. This was not just resistance, this was something else. The Zalrek Dominion had faced resistance before. They had encountered planetary militias, desperate insurgents, and rebellious factions unwilling to bow before the might of their empire. But resistance was predictable. Resistance could be crushed. What was happening on Earth was something far worse. It started with the disappearances. The first squads lost in the urban zones were written off as casualties, an expected loss during planetary subjugation. But then the numbers grew. Dozens of patrols sent out to enforce order never returned. Entire platoons of cybernetic warriors, equipped with the most advanced tracking technology in the Dominion, simply ceased to exist. Their transponders, designed to transmit across light years, were silenced without warning. No bodies were recovered. No wreckage from their armor was found. It was as if they had been erased from existence itself. The warlords, beings who had never known fear, demanded answers. They flooded Earth with drones, their insect-like machines scouring every city, every battlefield, searching for patterns, for logic, for something that made sense. But the more they searched, the stranger the results became. Surveillance footage, retrieved from the last known locations of missing squads, showed only fragmented images. The soldiers would be seen patrolling, weapons raised, their cybernetic eyes scanning for threats. Then, without warning, the footage would distort. A flicker, a moment of static, and when the image returned, the patrol was gone. The streets were empty. The silence was absolute. The Zalrek did not understand silence. On every world they had conquered, the screams of the defeated had been a certainty, an assurance of power. There was always noise, desperate transmissions, calls for aid, the dying, gasps of the conquered. But here, on Earth, their forces disappeared without a sound. Even the cybernetic enforcers, built with fail-safe protocols to relay distress signals upon termination, said nothing as they vanished. It was as if the planet itself was swallowing them whole. Desperation grew. More forces were deployed. The warlords, unwilling to accept the possibility of the unknown, ordered the destruction of entire regions suspected of harboring resistance. Major cities were reduced to smoking craters. Entire populations were erased by orbital bombardments. If they could not locate the enemy, they would simply burn everything. But even in the ruins, the humans remained. They did not fight for territory, nor did they defend static positions as other species had. They moved in ways that defied conventional warfare, striking and disappearing before the Zalrek could retaliate. They operated as if they could see the future, predicting troop movements with impossible precision. No intelligence reports explained how human forces had gained access to Dominion communication codes, yet every counterattack was executed with an uncanny awareness of the enemy's plans. It was as if the humans were inside their minds, dissecting their strategies before they could be deployed. The warlords began to hear rumors among their own forces. Impossible rumors. Things that should not have been spoken within the disciplined ranks of the Dominion. Soldiers whispered of an unseen force guiding the humans, an intelligence beyond the understanding of the Zalrek. Some claimed that Earth itself was alive, protecting its inhabitants with an energy that could not be measured or destroyed. Others believed that the humans had unlocked something buried deep within themselves, something ancient, something even the Dominion could not fight. And then, the first Zalrek began to defect. It was unthinkable. The Dominion was built upon absolute control, a hierarchy that had never been questioned. The The cybernetic enforcers, programmed for unwavering loyalty, had no concept of rebellion. Yet, without explanation, some of them began to turn against their own kind. Warships went dark, their captains failing to respond to orders. Squads of soldiers deployed into human-controlled regions returned different. Their neural implants, designed to suppress fear, no longer functioned as they should. They spoke of seeing things, visions they could not describe, voices whispering in a language they did not know. Some refused to fight, altogether, laying down their weapons in what the warlords could only describe as surrender. But it was not surrender. It was something else. The Dominion had fought countless wars, crushed species who had believed in gods, spirits, and unseen forces. But now, for the first time, the Zalrek found themselves questioning their own reality. What if the humans were not alone in this fight? What if they were tapping into something deeper? Something the Dominion had overlooked. The war that should have ended in days had now stretched into weeks. Entire fleets were now at risk. The Dominion had sent its most powerful armada to conquer a primitive world, and yet, for the first time in history, they were not certain they would succeed. The Dominion had underestimated them. They had assumed humanity's resilience was a temporary obstacle, an anomaly to be corrected with sheer force. But as the war stretched on, it became clear that they had made a grave miscalculation. Humanity was not merely surviving. They were adapting, learning, and most disturbingly, they were changing the battlefield itself. At first, the Zalrek believed the humans' tactics were primitive but effective. Hit-and-run strikes, sabotage, psychological warfare. But as their forces dwindled, they realized this was no mere resistance. It was something far more insidious. Human forces did not engage in conventional warfare. They did not hold ground or operate by predictable military doctrine. Instead, they struck where they were least expected, dismantling the Dominion's infrastructure with surgical precision. Supply chains were disrupted with eerie efficiency. Key officers disappeared without a trace. Even the warlords themselves, beings who had stood unchallenged for centuries, found themselves questioning their own safety. It was not just that the humans were winning battles. It was the way they fought, as though they had studied the Dominions. Every move, every reaction, and exploited weaknesses that should have been imperceptible. Zalrek commanders, veterans of countless campaigns, found their strategies useless. Even their most advanced predictive models failed to account for the sheer unpredictability of their enemy. It was as if humanity was thinking on a level they could not comprehend. Then came the reports of Dominion soldiers abandoning their posts. It had started as an anomaly, 1 or 2 units failing to respond, perhaps due to jamming or sabotage. But soon, entire battalions began deserting. The warlords interrogated those they managed to recover, and the answers they received were troubling. The deserters spoke of hallucinations, of voices whispering to them in their own language, revealing truths they could not ignore. Some claimed that they had seen the future, that continuing the war would lead only to ruin. Others swore they had experienced something beyond explanation, an understanding, an overwhelming clarity that stripped away their devotion to the Dominion. And then there were those who refused to speak at all. Their cybernetic enhancements, once a tool of control, had become their prison. Neural inhibitors designed to enforce obedience now burned out under unknown stress. Their minds, once wholly devoted to the Dominion, were unraveling. Some clawed at their own implants, trying to rip them from their skulls. Others simply stood in silence, staring at nothing, as if they had glimpsed something too vast to comprehend. The warlords, for the first time in history, knew fear. Desperation took hold. The Dominion escalated beyond anything they had done before. They deployed weapons that had erased entire civilizations, unleashed experimental horrors designed to break an enemy's will. The sky burned with kinetic bombardments. Cities were turned to wastelands of glass and ash. Still, the humans endured. No matter how many died, no matter how much was destroyed, they fought on. And with every passing day, the Dominion's forces diminished, not just from casualties, but from something far worse: doubt. Even the machines were beginning to fail. Dominion warships, vast constructs built with technology millennia ahead of Earth's, began suffering inexplicable malfunctions. AI-controlled systems, designed to be flawless, hesitated at critical moments. Targeting solutions failed without reason. Entire ship-wide networks crashed in unison, leaving vessels vulnerable at the worst possible moments. It was subtle at first, errors dismissed as battlefield anomalies. But then, during a crucial engagement, an entire Zalrek dreadnought fleet turned their weapons on each other. No explanation, no warning. Dozens of capital ships, the backbone of the Dominion's war machine, annihilated themselves in a matter of minutes. The warlords watched in stunned silence as their empire's might crumbled, not through brute force, but through something far more terrifying and unraveling. What they had believed to be a simple conquest had turned into something else entirely. Humanity was not just resisting, they were reaching into the very fabric of the Dominion's power and breaking it apart. And as the warlords stood on the bridge of their failing warships, staring at the vast blue planet below, they began to understand. Earth was not merely a battleground. It was something far older, far deeper than they had ever realized. Panic spread through the Dominion's ranks like a virus. The warlords, once masters of untold star systems, now found themselves gripped by an emotion they had never truly experienced: helplessness. Their fleets, which had shattered empires and rewritten the fate of civilizations, were crumbling in ways they could not comprehend. The humans had not outgunned them. They had not overwhelmed them with sheer numbers. Instead, they had reached into the very core of the Dominion's war machine and twisted something fundamental. The ships no longer obeyed without question. The soldiers no longer fought with blind loyalty. The warlords themselves found their once iron grip slipping. Their commands met with hesitation, doubt, and in some cases, outright defiance. The Dominion had long believed themselves invincible, their technology so far beyond the grasp of lesser species that victory was inevitable. Yet they had never faced an enemy like humanity. Unlike other conquered civilizations, humans did not surrender when all seemed lost. They did not break under pressure. If anything, they thrived in it. The more desperate the situation became, the more they adapted. They learned their enemies' tactics. They turned weaknesses into strengths, and, most disturbingly, they fought with a kind of reckless ingenuity that defied all logic. No Dominion strategist could predict their actions because the humans themselves seemed to operate beyond the bounds of traditional warfare. The warlords convened in secret, their arrogance shattered, their voices laced with something dangerously close to desperation. They spoke of anomalies that defied explanation. Weapon systems that should have been foolproof suddenly refused to fire. Entire fleets received contradictory orders from command structures that had never issued them. Even their most advanced cybernetic units, beings with no concept of fear, began exhibiting signs of hesitation, some even turning their weapons on their own. It was as if the Dominion itself was rotting from within. But the most disturbing reports did not come from the battlefield. They came from within the Dominion's own strongholds, whispered by those who had once been unshakable in their loyalty. Warlords who had never known doubt now found themselves haunted by thoughts that were not their own. Night after night, they experienced visions, memories of lives they had never lived, of choices they had never made. Some saw themselves as humans, felt the weight of mortal frailty, the ache of hunger, the sting of loss. Others found themselves trapped in endless loops of possibility, reliving the war from different perspectives, each time ending in ruin. And then there were those who, in their moments of solitude, heard voices. Not spoken in any known language, yet somehow understood. Not commands, but questions, demands, warnings. It was no longer a war, it was something else. Something ancient, something hidden beneath the surface of that unassuming blue world. Humanity was not merely fighting back. They were awakening something. The warlords, desperate for answers, turned to their greatest minds, their most advanced intelligence networks. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the Dominion. Earth was not what it seemed. The records, stretching back millennia, told a story that should have been impossible. Humanity had been forgotten once before. They had been wiped from Galactic. History erased so thoroughly that even the Dominion's own archives contained only fragments. But something had gone wrong. The purge had failed. Humanity had returned. And now, the universe was witnessing the consequences of that failure. The realization came too late. the Dominion had not just underestimated their enemy. They had provoked something far greater than they could understand. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting the art of control. Their empire was not just built on superior firepower, but on an intricate web of psychological manipulation, cybernetic enforcement, and absolute dominion over thought itself. To rule the galaxy, they had ensured that resistance was not only crushed, but rendered impossible. Yet now, in the face of humanity, their very foundation was unraveling. It started with whispers among their own ranks, soldiers questioning orders, officers hesitating before. Across the vast Dominion-controlled sectors, strange occurrences multiplied. Warships would receive conflicting directives from command nodes that had not been accessed. Strategic facilities would suddenly experience power failures, their automated defenses shutting down inexplicably. Even the Dominion's most sacred bastion of control, the Grand Mind, an artificial intelligence older than some of their conquered worlds, began showing erratic patterns in its calculations. The warlords demanded answers, but no explanation made sense. The humans had no access to their networks, no known means of infiltration, no weapons sophisticated enough to override Dominion systems. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The humans had reached into the very core of their empire and were unraveling it thread by thread. It was only when they turned their attention back to Earth that the truth became undeniable. Earth was old, older than the Dominion had first assumed. Records that had been buried for millennia, erased from every accessible database, had begun resurfacing in ways that should have been impossible. The warlords learned that Earth had been purged before, and yet, its inhabitants had returned stronger, more adaptable, more dangerous than before. And now, something hidden within that world was awake. The Dominion's strongest psychometric analysts, those who could read the very essence of minds across light years, reported interference unlike anything they had encountered. There were no signals, no transmissions, just an overwhelming sense of presence. A force that did not communicate with words, but with intent. A force that had been waiting. The realization spread like wildfire. The Dominion had not stumbled upon a mere species of defiant primitives. They had waged war against something that had endured extinction, something that had been shaped by survival in ways no other civilization had. Humanity's resilience was not simply biological, nor was it just a quirk of evolution. It was deeper. It was embedded in their very existence, in the way they adapted, in the way they refused to break. The Dominion had always believed that control was absolute, that all things could be bent to their will given enough force, enough time, enough precision. But the humans were proving otherwise. The final piece of the puzzle came too late. Dominion researchers, desperate to understand what was happening, traced anomalies back to their source, something buried deep within the structure of human consciousness itself. The humans were not simply resisting the Dominion's influence, they were turning it against them. The very techniques the Dominion had used to subjugate countless species, mind control protocols, neural conditioning, data infiltration, were being mirrored back at them in ways that should have been impossible. The humans were learning, evolving, adapting at a rate that defied every known law of intelligence. And then, in the heart of the Dominion's most secure communication nexus, the Grand Mind spoke a sentence that had never been programmed into its vast lexicon of directives. You should not have come. The message was clear. The war was no longer about territory or conquest. The Dominion had trespassed into something far older, something that had survived erasure, something that had been waiting in the shadows of history. The warlords, once so assured of their victory, now found themselves facing an enemy that did not fight for power or dominance, but for something far more terrifying: survival at any cost. Panic spread through the Dominion like a wildfire consuming a dying world. The warlords, once unshakable in their dominance, now faced an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. The humans were no longer just resisting. They were infiltrating, dismantling, and subverting the very mechanisms that had allowed the Dominion to rule unchallenged for centuries. The Grand Mind, the artificial intelligence that governed the strategic backbone of their empire, had fallen silent. No directives, no responses. Just the lingering echo of a message that defied every known law of control. You should not have come. It was not merely a statement, it was a warning. and one that sent ripples of dread through the highest echelons of the Dominion hierarchy. Fleet commanders in orbit around Earth reported a surge of anomalies within their systems. Shields flickered without reason. Targeting arrays failed to lock onto human vessels, as if space itself rejected the notion of battle. Pilots found themselves experiencing unexplained cognitive disruptions, their thoughts clouded with foreign impressions, flashes of memories that did not belong to them, emotions that were not their own. The Dominion had always relied on precision and order, but now they were facing something insidious, something chaotic, and worst of all, something intelligent. The humans were not just resisting their control, they were learning from it, turning it into a weapon of their own. On the surface of Earth, the conflict had shifted into something that no Dominion strategist could have anticipated. What should have been a simple conquest had become an escalating nightmare. Entire strike teams vanished without a trace, their last transmissions filled with fragmented thoughts of overwhelming dread. Energy weapons, designed to disintegrate organic matter with ruthless efficiency, began malfunctioning in inexplicable ways. One soldier reported his rifle overheating without firing a shot. Another claimed that, for a brief moment, he felt as though his weapon had been pried from his hands by something unseen, something that existed not in the physical realm, but within his own mind. The Dominion had come expecting a primitive battlefield. Instead, they had waded into an invisible war, where the rules of engagement were shifting beneath their feet. Desperation took hold. The Dominion had never known fear in its long history, yet now it gripped their commanders like a vice. Attempts to coordinate a planetary bombardment, erasing Earth from existence, were met with a terrifying realization. The orbital stations, once bastions of their supreme technological might, were now under siege from within. Security footage revealed horrifying imagery, Dominion personnel standing motionless, staring blankly as if lost in a trance. Officers turned on their own men without warning, acting with eerie precision yet speaking in voices that did not belong to them. The humans had found a way into their minds. And worse, they had done so without the need for machines, without the use of technology that could be countered or disabled. This was something deeper, something intrinsic. A final, desperate order was given. Full retreat. The Dominion had suffered defeats before, but never like this. There was no fleet to fall back to, no stronghold to regroup at. The very foundation of their empire was fracturing under the weight of something they did not understand. As their ships attempted to flee, strange disturbances rippled through space. Engines failed, navigation systems refused to obey commands, and in the eerie silence between the stars, the Dominion's elite officers experienced something far worse than death: understanding. The humans were not merely survivors, they were something more, something ancient, something indomitable, and then, as if to confirm the unspoken horror, a final message resonated through the collapsing Dominion fleet. A voice, speaking not in words, but in the very essence of thought itself, whispering across the void. You should not have come. The remnants of the Dominion fleet drifted in the void, silent and broken. What was once a proud armada, an unshakable force that had subjugated entire civilizations without resistance, now lay scattered in ruin. Some vessels remained intact, their hulls undamaged, yet their crews were eerily absent. Others spun lifelessly, their command centers filled with nothing but the static hum of forgotten voices. It was as if something had unraveled them from the inside out, not through weapons or brute force, but through something far more terrifying: understanding. The humans had not just repelled the invasion, they had rewritten the nature of war itself. Aboard the Dominion's last surviving warship, Supreme Commander Varkos stood frozen, his scaled hands gripping the edge of the command console. He had been raised in the doctrine of absolute superiority, taught from the moment he could comprehend language that the Dominion was the pinnacle of evolution. Conquest was their birthright, the universe itself their dominion. But now, as he watched his fleet succumb to an unseen force, he felt something he had never known before. A sickness in his mind. A creeping realization that would not let go. The humans had looked into the very core of the Dominion's strength and found its weakness. They had fought without weapons, without fleets of equal power. without the desperate, reckless savagery that so many weaker species resorted to when faced with inevitable defeat. Instead, they had reached into the Dominion's collective mind, weaving their own presence into the very fabric of thought until resistance became impossible. The whispers had started first. Not voices, not commands, but emotions. Doubt, regret, the ghostly impressions of lives lost across 1,000 conquests. It was as if the humans had turned the Dominion's own history against them, forcing them to experience the weight of their own destruction. Varkos had seen hardened officers break down, their once unshakable minds consumed by something they could not fight. He had watched entire squads collapse where they stood, their eyes wide with the realization that for all their power, for all their technology, they had underestimated the one thing that made humanity different. Humanity did not fight wars for conquest. They fought wars for survival, and they learned, they adapted, they became what they needed to be. As Varkos struggled to issue a retreat command, his vision blurred. His thoughts, once sharp and unwavering, began to unravel. For the first time, he felt the weight of every world the Dominion had ever conquered, every life extinguished in the name of control, every desperate plea silenced beneath the crushing force of their rule. It was not guilt, it was something worse, it was understanding. The humans were showing them what it meant to feel, to truly experience the suffering they had inflicted across the stars, and there was no defense against it. Across the surviving ships, the Dominion soldiers no longer fought. They simply stood, staring into nothingness, trapped in the prison of their own minds. The human presence was there with them, not as a voice, not as an invader, but as a force that had always existed, waiting beneath the surface. A hidden strength, not of weapons or numbers, but of will, of resilience, of the ability to endure, what no other species could. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the presence withdrew. The fleet was left adrift, broken not by battle, but by the weight of what they had witnessed. Those who remained would never speak of it. They would never return to Earth, never seek revenge. The Dominion had learned a lesson that no warlord, no emperor, no supreme ruler had ever dared to acknowledge. Some enemies could not be defeated. Some battles were lost before they even began. As Supreme Commander Varkos staggered to his feet, he issued the only command that mattered now. The Dominion would withdraw from the Sol system. They would erase it from their records, never to return. The war was over. Not because they had been defeated, but because they had seen the truth. Humanity was not just another species to be conquered. Humanity was something else entirely.